Welcome back, everybody, for another live update on the Israel-Gaza war. An in-depth interview with Zvi Newman. Has been on the show before and has had handfuls of requests to come back. And so we'll welcome him back right now. Zvi, obviously, how are you is not the greeting anybody's wanting to hear, but please, we're glad you're back. We're glad you're safe. And there's a lot of people asking for more updates. And I think the last one you did was pretty in-depth, and so we'd like to see what you have for us today on the war in Gaza and Israel right now.
Okay, well, thank you, William, and thank you to the audience for asking me to come back. It's quite the pleasure. We're doing okay. Baruch Hashem, thank God. We're getting through this more or less okay so far. And we'll dive into what's going on here in just a moment. First off, though, over the past couple of sessions that we've had, I gave a couple of news sources in English that may be of use to people who want to know what's going on in more depth than what we might be getting from the mainstream media. So I have another one today, which some of you might already know, actually, called I-24 News.
Right.
It's an online internet news service coming out of Israel in English. It's very good.
Don't they have a isn't there a WhatsApp link for that as well? I think there's maybe that you can get your updates on. But yeah, definitely check that out. I-24 News, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a very good site, so that's recommended. Okay, so let's move now into the war. And then we'll talk about the home front.
Okay.
And then we'll talk about ways that, or a way that people who would like to help can help. And then we'll finish off with a short Torah thought.
Sounds good.
So as far as the war, basically what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to give some updates of what's happening. The past couple of sessions, we went into some of the background and some of the deeper and wider knowledge that is important to know. Like I began to say, in the past couple of sessions, we've talked about the wider and the deeper context that people need to know if they want to know what's going on here in depth. So now I'm just going to move more towards updates that you may not be hearing through the mainstream media. So as far as the overall picture, this most of you probably know, but I'll sort of draw the overall framework just in case. We had a ceasefire of about a week or so, during which time we had hostage releases, or rather prisoner exchanges, however you want to call it, where Israel released 3 terrorists from its jails for every one Israeli hostage. And there was very little fighting going on either front, either in Gaza or in the north during that period of time. Now, everybody knows, of course, that Hamas and Hezbollah were using that time to rearm and to reorganize and to better prepare themselves for the next stage of fighting. Israel said all along that it will be prepared for any eventuality that would come out of that. And indeed, the hostilities started again on Friday. And so far, the news coming out of the Gaza Strip is such that we are attacking very, very aggressively in several places. I'll get to that in just a second. And we are suffering some losses, but not a whole lot at the moment. And the front on the north was quiet for a little bit. And then over the past couple of days, it started to heat up again. And everybody's wondering, when is the northern front going to completely erupt and turn into a full-scale war? In addition, we have constant action going on in Syria on the part of these pro-Iranian militias that are operating there. And of course, we have the Houthis in Yemen, who have been shooting various missiles and sending various drones at us along the way. So that's sort of the overall picture. And now let's take a quick dive into each one of those fronts to hear some things that are going on that you might not have heard in the mainstream media. In the Gaza Strip, basically Israel already, before the ceasefire, had taken over most of the northern quarter or maybe third of the Gaza Strip. There are still pockets of resistance there. There's still areas that the IDF has not cleared out of Hamas terrorists. They are working to do that now as we speak. In fact, we have neighbors here who have 3 sons in the army at the moment, all of them in combat units, 1 in the north and 2 inside Gaza. And one of them just came home for a quick break so he could see his wife and his children and his parents, who are our neighbors, of course. And he just told me that he's in the tank unit, and they're in one of the neighborhoods in Gaza City, which has been notorious for seriously damaging, doing serious damage to Israeli forces that have fought there a couple of times in the past in various rounds of violence in previous years. And I think this time they want to clear the place out completely. So there's action going on in the northern part of the Strip in that way. In other words, cleaning up what hasn't been cleaned up yet. In the southern part of the Gaza Strip, which is about the southern 2/3 or 3/4 or so of the Strip, Israel had not done a whole lot beyond airstrikes before the ceasefire, but it is now stepping up very aggressively its actions there. And the reason is that that's actually the main Hamas stronghold. There's a city in the middle of the Gaza Strip called Khan Yunis. It's a small city that is home to Yahya Sinwar, who is pretty much the head of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Of course, they also have political heads abroad who are based usually in Qatar, and they also are hosted at various times by Syria and by Turkey and by Lebanon and whoever else. But Sinwar is basically the main commander, the main figurehead here in the actual Gaza Strip. He's the one who's behind the vicious attack of October 7th. And he's from Khan Yunis, and he is probably under the city in the network of tunnels that Hamas has under the Gaza Strip. And the army is now working towards clearing out all of Hamas, whether terrorists themselves, weapons, ammunition storage, intelligence infrastructure, documents, money from Khan Yunis. And they will, of course, make the attempt to take out Yahya Sinwar whenever they get the chance. That, of course, will be complicated very much by the likelihood that he's got a number of Israeli hostages shielding him wherever he is underneath the city of Khan Yunis at the moment. And we'll have to see what happens in that respect when we get there. Also, further south, there are towns and cities and refugee camps like Deir al-Balach and Rafiah, which sits on the border with Egypt, and the army is acting there as well. Now, we have the problem of the civilian population versus as opposed to the actual Hamas terrorist organization. We discussed last time the fact that there are not a whole lot of civilians in the Gaza Strip who are not affiliated or dependent on or somehow connected with the Hamas terror movement, which runs the Gaza Strip, basically. And the support, the popular support among the population in Gaza of Hamas and its allies, like the Islamic Jihad, for example, the level of support is very, very high. So it can be difficult to distinguish sometimes between someone who's an actual armed member of Hamas and a civilian who might not be armed or might not be wearing a uniform, but could very well be assisting the members of Hamas in various ways. There could be a tunnel exit right under their house or on their property. They could be assisting with administrative activities, with intelligence activities, social media these days, all sorts of things. And another thing to keep in mind is the fact that now that more and more information is coming out about the massive attack that Hamas made on Israel, on the southern communities in Israel on October 7th, we find that the vast majority of Gazan residents who did the absolute worst atrocities in terms of torture, rape, all sorts of physical abuse, murder, destruction of bodies, and such during the course of that attack. The vast majority of the people who did that were actually civilians wearing civilian clothes, sometimes even sandals and flip-flops, and they just followed the Hamas terrorist fighters through the fence, came into the communities, and did far worse in many cases than the actual Hamas terrorists, who very often, this is bad enough, of course, in and of itself, but for the most part, they were satisfied with just shooting lots of Israelis, or burning down their houses and burning them alive, and not a whole lot beyond that. Some of them did, of course, take part in rape and torture and kidnapping and so on, but the vast majority was actually civilians. So I think it's very important to keep that in mind, especially now that the subject of Gazan civilians has become one of the top subjects being discussed in the media and among the various political leaders around the world, including, of course, the United States administration and the rest of the Western capitals. So it's going to get very complicated. We don't know how many hostages are located in various places. We don't know how many of them are still alive, but for sure, the senior leadership, Yahya Sinwar and Mohammed Def and the various other Hamas leaders, they certainly have hostages around them, using them as human shields. Another problem building up there is the fact that Hamas very often prevents, or at least discourages, the civilian population from leaving their homes and moving to safe areas. The Israeli army is constantly broadcasting and dropping leaflets into the population centers where they're going to be hitting, and encouraging the people to move to very specific, clearly defined areas, so that they won't be hurt by or killed, of course, by the bombing and the shooting. But very often Hamas either actually prevents them by standing on the roads and shooting at people who try to evacuate their homes, or through other means. But in any case, they're using their own population as human shields yet again. They did that in the first part of the war, and they're doing it now again, and there's no reason to expect that they'll change that modus operandi. So what we're going to have here is probably massive fighting, including massive explosions of very deep underground tunnels, and destruction of a lot of infrastructure, and the taking out of a lot of Hamas terrorists in a very densely populated area with a lot of civilians who are not being allowed by Hamas to leave their homes. And the safe areas are going to get smaller and smaller as the Israeli army proceeds. And this is going to lead to a lot of dilemmas. It's probably going to lead to a lot of very, very tough incidents. And the Egyptians down at the bottom of the Gaza Strip, the southern tip of the Gaza Strip, at the Rafiah crossing, are not allowing the Gazan civilians to escape into Egypt. So this is a pressure cooker which the entire world is watching, and it's likely to boil over at some point. So that's something we all need to watch out for, because it could very well become a massive international incident with many diplomatic, military, and economic ramifications. One of which, of course, would be the further move into violence by the jihadists in throughout the world, basically, but of course in the U.S. and Canada and Western Europe and other countries that are identified with Israel to one level or another and represent some of the same values that Israel represents. So moving now to the tunnels, this is a subject which comes up a lot. The Israeli army just about 2 weeks ago released some more information, updated information about the network of tunnels that Hamas has built under the Gaza Strip. It's a lot bigger. This network of tunnels is a lot bigger and more complex than anybody at least among the civilian population here had imagined. It's now estimated to be a total of 500 kilometers in length, with 8 levels in some places. In other words, 8 stories underground, 80 meters deep. And to date, in the northern part of the strip, where the infantry and armored personnel from in the Israeli army have been operating, 800 tunnel exits have been discovered. 500 of those have been destroyed, and they haven't told us how many kilometers worth of tunnels have been destroyed, but they've been doing that as well. There's been a lot of demolition going on underground, and I think also possibly some flooding with seawater in other areas. One thing they want to be very careful of is to try not to injure or kill any Israeli hostages who may be in these tunnels, and that's one of the reasons they have to go very, very slowly, very, very carefully in uncovering the tunnels and researching them up close and deciding what to do with them once they know that a certain tunnel area is clear of hostages and there's nothing else of interest in there as far as documents or other evidence that we may need for intelligence purposes. So that's a little bit about the tunnels. An interesting point I just remembered is a friend of mine who's in his 40s now. He served in the 1990s in the Gaza Strip in the army before Israel turned the Strip over to the Palestinian Authority and de facto to Hamas in the disengagement. And he said that even back then there was a network of tunnels under the Gaza Strip, but it was entirely tunnels that led into Egypt, and they were used for smuggling. And basically, local families, local clans owned or controlled these tunnels, and they used them quite profitably to smuggle anything that anyone would want to smuggle. And this network of tunnels then turned into this massive terror network underneath much of the Gaza Strip since Hamas took over and expanded this network of tunnels. So that's the tunnels. Let's move now to the hostages. There are still 136 hostages remaining in the Gaza Strip. I'm not sure how many of them are. Most of them, of course, are Israelis. I think some of them are foreign citizens that don't have Israeli citizenship. We know that there were a number of agricultural workers from Thailand who were kidnapped and kept for many weeks by Hamas, and many of them have been released, and they've since been flown home to Thailand and went to the Philippines. And there are some people who have dual citizenship, Israeli citizenship plus American or German or Russian or whatever other country. And in a couple of cases, Hamas has agreed to release some people who have dual citizenship, especially Russian citizenship. But there are still, like I said, 136 hostages listed as being in the Gaza Strip, but we don't know. We, the civilians at least, we don't know where they are. The army probably has significant intelligence, but we don't know yet how much they know and what's going to be as far as their fate. Now, I'm sure that many of you saw at least some of the footage and some of the reports coming out last week with the several days worth of hostage releases. It's worth mentioning that the International Red Cross, which was charged with visiting the hostages, making contact with them, checking them out as far as their medical condition, bringing them, making sure that they had pharmaceuticals and medications and so on. They did none of that. They claimed that they tried to make contact, but Hamas would not let them. But there is very little, if any, evidence to show that they actually did try to do that. And as such, the hostages have not been seen by anyone except for their own captors for this. What has it been now? About 2 months since they were captured. Many of the hostages who were released, they're almost all of them are older women and mothers in their 30s and 40s, and a lot of children. Many of them were in, let's call it reasonable condition as far as their health, but they're telling some horror stories about the conditions under which they were kept in the Gaza Strip. They had very little food. They were kept in the tunnels in very poor conditions. Very few of them had the chance to change clothes. I think none of them were able to take showers at all during the 6 or 7 weeks, whatever it was, that they were kept there. Some of them were kept in isolation for much of the time or most of the time. The children were all very frightened by their situation, and they were told to keep quiet. So they only spoke in whispers, and some of them, even after they were released and had gone home, were still only able to communicate with their parents in whispers and not in full voice, because they were still in that mindset of being under threat under Hamas captivity. Some of them were beaten when they were brought into the Gaza Strip before they were, in the streets of Gaza City, for example, before they were brought down into the tunnels or wherever they were being kept. Some of them were beaten by the crowds. The crowds are not armed Hamas terrorists. The crowds, again, are civilians off the street in the Gaza Strip that had no clue beforehand that they were going to be able to get their hands on Israeli hostages, parading through the streets or being paraded through the streets of Gaza. And I'm sure we're going to hear some more stories as time goes by. That's as far as the Israeli hostages for the most part. Oh, and a couple of them, a couple of the older ones were in pretty bad shape health-wise, even life-threatening shape. And they're being treated in a couple of hospitals. And last I heard, the one or two of them that were in particularly bad circumstances were actually getting better, but the doctors were saying that they had not had any opportunity at all to take life-saving medications that they needed while they were in captivity, and this, of course, put them in a very, very bad situation health-wise. That's the hostages. Now, last time we talked about some of the issues surrounding the Palestinian security prisoners who are being released in a proportion of 3 Palestinian prisoners per 1 Israeli hostage. Every last one of these people, they're all women and minors. There might have been 1 or 2 exceptions to that, but most, if not all of them, are women or minors. Every single one of them had attempted at some point or another in the past few years to kill Israelis. They were caught on the way to trying to carry out an attack, or they began to carry out an attack, and they were neutralized during the course of it without having the chance to actually murder anyone. Some of them actually did manage to injure some people by stabbing them. There was one woman who was caught at a checkpoint going into Jerusalem. She had a makeshift car bomb in the front seat of her car, and when she was stopped by the police there, she blew up the bomb, burning and injuring the police officer, burning and injuring herself. And when she was in jail, I think this was about 2 years ago, she actually had the nerve to make a whole big public campaign through which she wanted Israeli tax money to pay for reconstructive surgery for her nose that was disfigured by the bomb blast. So she was released, and many others like her. And one particular person who was released, we actually talked about her last time, a young woman named Ahad Tamami, who lives near Ramallah, which is just a bit north of Jerusalem. She has been a provocateur in the media and on the streets of of the Palestinian Authority for many years, since she was a little girl. She's now, I think, in her 20s. There's a lot of footage of her out there provoking Israeli soldiers by walking up to them and insulting them and spitting on them and smacking them and throwing things at them and so on, trying to provoke a response that will be filmed and spread all over the world, showing how the Israeli soldiers were treating this innocent young girl badly, whereas she wasn't really so innocent. I don't think she was ever actually assaulted by any of the soldiers, but that's what she was trying to do. And she's very well known in Palestinian Arab society and in the Islamic world. Anybody who follows the events here in the Arab world, they know her for sure. And her family is well connected with the Palestinian Authority. So she was released, and I mentioned last time that she was actually put in jail very recently, just a few weeks back. And the reason is that she said publicly on social media, I think it was in Arabic, she said that referring to the Israeli settlers in Judea and Samaria, otherwise known as the West Bank, in other words, the heartland of the land of Israel, she basically said, the settlers are evil, and we're going to come and we're going to drink their blood and we're going to eat their skulls, among other choice expressions that she used. So she was actually arrested and put in jail, and then now she's been released. What did she do when she was released? She went straight to the TV cameras in Arabic. It might have been Al Jazeera. I don't remember which channel it was. Doesn't matter. And she said that the treatment of the Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails is absolutely horrendous. They're beaten. They're deprived of food. They're tortured. They're raped. She said that her father, the Israeli prison authorities, threatened to kill her father, all sorts of things like that. And this, of course, is spread all over the Arab world and the Islamic world. And a lot of people believe her. And I just have to wonder, did she do that? Would she have done that in any case? Or did she do that as a sort of a counterpunch to the accounts coming out of from the first-hand accounts coming out from the hostages, the Israeli hostages, as to how they were treated in Hamas captivity. And of course, all this is very cynical because we see that the medical evidence and the interviews and the testimonies from our hostages who were released speaks for itself. And when you see the footage of the Hamas terrorists escorting with guns the hostages to be released from the Hamas car over to the Red Cross car, and a couple of times they were so cynical they actually got the hostages to smile at them and wave at them, and and the terrorists waved back at them, with a friendly look, and they gave them bottles of water. Wow. As if they were humane and as if this was just some sort of a temporary arrangement where the kids were being kept. Were being watched by the neighbors for a few hours or something, when it was quite the opposite. So we, just have a look at how cynical and how manipulative and how good at psychological warfare these Hamas terrorists are. And then we see another side of it when Ahad Tamami, this international jihad superstar, comes out and spreads these lies about the Israeli prison system and the way the Palestinian prisoners are supposedly being treated. And, we see exactly what's going on here. So let's move on to, we'll take a step back now, again, to October 7th, this unprecedented, horrific attack perpetrated from the Gaza Strip on Israeli communities and army installations in the south. We had talked before, and I'm sure all of you have heard in any case, about the fact that Israel was completely unprepared for this, and there were scandalous mishaps and lack of responsible action and so on the Israeli side. And as such, the attack wasn't prevented, and the response to it was very, very late in coming, and the resulting fighting and damage was much worse than it could have been, should have been. And since then, as we mentioned last time, several Israeli officials have come forward and taken at least partial responsibility for it. None of them have been relieved of their duties. None of them have stepped down. Everybody's saying that these sorts of things will happen and the full investigation will happen after the war is over. But in the meantime, that's the situation. The same people are still in their positions. Excuse me. But I did want to mention one person in particular. He's a General Aaron Haliva, who is the head of Israeli military intelligence. And now he has come forward and taken responsibility, but taking responsibility for what exactly? He has been pushing for a very long time a line in which Hamas was deterred and it was not going to actually attack Israel anytime in the next few years. So the Hamas is now concentrating on solidifying its governance and trying to improve conditions for the civilians in the Gaza Strip. And anything that looks military that is doing is just for show or is just for general preparedness for sometime way down the line, years down the line, but nothing to be worried about. And he went so far as to say at a public conference at a university just a few months ago that Hamas is not really a threat to Israel right now. And the biggest threat facing Israel and the world is climate change. And therefore, Israel needs to devote its resources to helping to solve the climate change situation. That's what the guy said. It turns out now that he knew that Hamas was planning an attack that was to take place on or very close to the date that it took place, October 7th. And the only difference between what they thought was going to happen and what actually did happen is that the intelligence community and General Haliva thought that Hamas was only going to attack two targets, whether they were civilian communities or army installations or both, and leave it at that. It was going to be a small operation. And therefore, very few measures were taken, very few soldiers and electronic measures and preparations were taken to prevent this. And at the end of the day, several thousand terrorists, backed by several thousand civilians, broke through the fence in many places, and we all know what happened after that. So this is the scale of what's going on. This is one of the people who was very much in the know, at least to a certain degree. Maybe he didn't know about the full scale, but this was clearly just a massive debacle. So that's regarding Gaza for the time being. Let's move now to the Northern Front. The Northern Front was very quiet during the ceasefire. It has since heated up again, and there's a lot of missile activity and anti-tank missiles, anti-tank rockets and guided missiles being fired into Israeli communities and at Israeli forces on the border. Some drones of various kinds are being sent by Hezbollah into Israel. So far, recently, not a whole lot of damage has been done. Some people have been injured, some civilians and some soldiers as well. And Israel responds all the time, but it responds from afar, with artillery, with airstrikes. But it hasn't crossed the border, at least as far as we know. It has not crossed the border with infantry or anything mechanized, because doing so would pretty much set off the entire Northern Front into full-scale war. And Israel is hesitant to open a second full front at the moment, and we're being pushed very, very hard by the Biden administration not to do so as well, because the second that happens, America is in much more danger, as is the rest of the West, and the whole thing could spin out of control into a regional war very quickly. So at the moment, that's the situation in the North. It could break open at any moment. I don't think anybody believes that somehow or another it's going to be calmed down without having a big fight first. So let's move over to Syria. We've talked in the past about how there are pro-Iranian militias in Syria who are moving and sometimes even attacking us. From what I've seen over the past, I guess about 2 weeks, they haven't attacked us a whole lot, but they have been moving around, and Israel is taking various actions inside Syria to prevent these militias from getting too close and getting too well organized to attack us. Their counterparts, the counterparts of these militias in Iraq and also elsewhere in Syria, have been attacking American military bases steadily, and the U.S. has begun to fight back at a larger scale than it had been doing over the previous weeks. That could also erupt into something very big at any time, something else to keep our eyes on. Let's move down now to Yemen. Last time we spoke, the Houthi regime, which controls part of Yemen, had literally just declared war on Israel. They have since fired missiles at Eilat and elsewhere in the Israeli south a couple of times. All of them have been intercepted by Israel or by the U.S. Or have fallen short of their target. A couple of them fell in Egypt, actually. The Houthis have also, basically they've taken over a couple of ships in the Red Sea. A couple of them Israeli-owned or partially owned by Israelis, but without any Israelis on board, with foreign crews. There's also been some activity by Somali pirates going on at the same time. It's a very complicated sort of an issue. The Houthis attacked an American ship, a civilian commercial ship, a few days ago, and apparently the U.S. Navy went and took action against the Houthis in retaliation. And also there was some kind of an explosion at some sort of a Houthi military installation in Yemen that Israel apparently was responsible for sometime over the past couple of days, most likely in retaliation, of course, for what the Houthis have been doing as far as attacking us here and there as they can up until now. That's another theater which could open up in various ways. Of course, Iran backs the Houthis and supplies them and arms them and funds them. And the Saudis are semi-at war with the Houthis. They've been bombing them from the air since 2015. And this whole situation could become another international theater of war at any given moment.
Wow.
So those are the fronts as far as the war is concerned. Let's move now to the home front. A couple pieces of news from inside Israel. There have been 2 terror attacks recently in Jerusalem, or basically at 2 entrances to Jerusalem. The first one was, I think, about 2 weeks ago at the southern entrance to Jerusalem, which is about 25 minutes, I think it is, from my house, actually. In that attack, several terrorists from the Hebron area tried to get into Jerusalem. They had they had automatic rifles, they had pistols, they had some grenades, I think. And the checkpoint team, which is partially army, partially police, stopped them. There was a shootout. 1 Israeli soldier was killed, and the terrorists were all killed. So they're trying to get to Jerusalem and strike civilians and police and whoever else they can get, and maybe even open up an additional front, as we've discussed before, in Judea, Samaria, Jerusalem, and not just in Gaza. And then just a couple of days ago, there was another attack at the western entrance to Jerusalem, which is the main entrance for coming from the direction of Tel Aviv, where A couple of Hamas terrorists from eastern Jerusalem, the residents of Jerusalem itself, got out of a car and just started shooting. They had an M16, they had a Glock pistol. They managed to kill 3 people. They killed an elderly rabbi, and they killed a woman from Jerusalem, and they killed a woman from my city, Beit Shemesh, who was the principal of a school. And these people were standing at the bus stop waiting for a bus. The terrorists were shot and killed by a combination of fire from soldiers and I think one civilian. And a very tragic incident happened there. One of the people who had he was either an off-duty soldier or was a civilian. He had actually killed one of the terrorists, and a soldier mistook him for a terrorist and shot him dead. And this has led to a big debate in the country, very tense debate about firearms, who should be issued firearms, and what sort of gun control should there be. Right now, there's pretty tight gun control in Israel, although the national security minister, who's a very controversial personality in this country, has decided to make it much easier for civilians to get pistol licenses and buy pistols. And this is, of course, fanned the flames of the argument about who should have weapons and who shouldn't, and whose fault this sort of incident actually is. So that's as far as terror attacks within Jerusalem during the course of all of this. Let's move now to the home front and to the evacuees. There are 2 sort of categories of people who were evacuated from their homes during the course of all of this warfare. We have, of course, the residents of the kibbutzim and the moshavim, the communities, the agricultural communities. They were very close to the Gaza Strip, and were hit very hard on the attack during the attack on October 7th. Most of those people were evacuated. Many of the homes and agricultural facilities and industrial facilities and such in these communities have been destroyed by Hamas. They were burned. They were destroyed with rocket-propelled grenades and various means. So these people were moved out, and a few of them have moved back where the army has allowed it. But these people have moved out, and they've stayed together as communities. They have a very strong sense of community, and as far as can be done under these circumstances, for the most part, they're doing okay because they're able to remain together in their organized community framework. On the other hand, we have a second category of people who were evacuated, and these are residents of the development towns and small cities that are also in close proximity to the front lines. In this case, the cities of Ofakim and Sderot in the south. Both of these cities were under heavy rocket fire for many, many years already, for decades already. But they took a lot of rocket fire on October 7th, and they were infiltrated by Hamas terrorists, and there were gun battles in the streets of these cities. First thing in the morning on Shabbat, there was also Shmini Atzeret, Simchat Torah, the end of the Sukkot holiday. And the entire city of Sderot was evacuated, and they're living in hotels in a couple of different sites around the country, including at the Dead Sea. As of today, I found out they do not know when they're going to be moving back. Right now, Sderot is being used as an army staging ground, and it's still under rocket fire. So nobody knows right now when these people are going to move back. Then we have the city of Ofakim, which is a little bit further away, a little bit closer to Beersheba, but it was also infiltrated, and there were also gunfights there on October 7th. And some of the residents evacuated. They have now returned or will be returning very soon. And the city is trying to put back together the routine of commerce and education and recreation and everyday life as best as can be done under the circumstances. And there's also another city, this one in the north, very, very close to the Lebanese border, Kiryat Shmona, which has been the target of, in the old days, PLO missiles and later on Hezbollah missiles also for decades. And their close proximity to the border makes them particularly susceptible also to not only to bombardment, but also to terrorist infiltration should Hezbollah actually cross the border and try to infiltrate. So the entire city of Kiryat Shmona was evacuated as well. And they are spread out in, I think the number is 120 hotels throughout the country. So you have the population of a city, a small city, but a city nonetheless, now spread out, living in hotels in 120 different locations throughout the country. There are also kibbutzim and moshavim, small communities, agricultural communities, community villages, and so on in the north that are close to the border that have been evacuated, and their situation is a little bit more like their counterparts in the south, where they have a little bit of an easier time getting by because they have a community structure and they're able to stay together in large part. But we need to mention the situation of the residents of the cities, Kiryat Shmona in the north and Sderot and Ofakim in the south, who were evacuated. Besides the warfare trauma that they went through, these are places that are very, very challenged at the in the socioeconomic sense. You have a lot of people there who struggle to get by. You have a lot of family problems. You have a lot of issues with violence and drugs and at-risk behavior. And these are populations that they have it rough in life. And whatever the situation was before this evacuation, they bring that situation with them, and added on top of that, we have the stresses of the war, the stresses of the violence that they had inside their own cities, rocket attacks, and in some cases, gun battles in the streets, and the fact that they're now scattered throughout the country in hotels, and they have no clue when they're going to be returning home. It's a very, very stressful, very, very difficult situation for them, and it hits particularly hard among the teenagers. We find that the teenagers have disconnected very much from everyday life, from any kind of school and organized activity frameworks that have been set up for them in the locations where they've been evacuated to, whether at the hotels in the Dead Sea or in Tiberias or in Eilat. And we have a lot of at-risk behavior starting up: drugs, alcohol, vandalism, prostitution. There's more and more violence. A lot of difficulties between these teenagers and their parents, much more than usually happens in any typical house between teenagers and parents. So it's all magnified. And we could actually be on the verge of a very, very serious social crisis, socioeconomic crisis, regardless of the war. It's caused by the war or exacerbated by the war, but certainly to be front and center on the national agenda for many years to come, it would seem. And that brings me to a way that anyone who would like to help can help. I've brought this up in the past couple of sessions that we've had. I work at an organization called the Rashi Foundation. We do education, employment, and welfare in Israel's socioeconomic periphery. And since the war broke out on October 7th, we've been working with all of our resources around the clock to help the civilian victims of the war on the Israeli side. And nowadays, we find that our main focus is actually the teenagers among the evacuees that I just mentioned. So, if anyone would like to help us in our efforts with education and therapy and respite and bringing some sort of an anchoring and an organized framework to these teenagers. We would very much welcome donations. William has the link; he can post it. I think a couple of you already have actually given. If you have, I thank you at this point, and anyone else who would like to help would be most appreciated, and it will be the money will be very, very effectively used.
The link information has
in
been
projects that are already up and running and will be expanding and evolving over the course of time for the sake of these teenagers.
The link information is underneath the.
So that brings me to the end of my update
post.
About the war, the various fronts and the home front, and that brings us to my final point, which is a little bit of Torah's perspective on what's going on.
Okay.
And we're going to focus this time on geography. Geography is holy and highly meaningful in this part of the world, in the land of Israel. And we find that different parts of the land of Israel have specific spiritual meaning, and various events happen in the world, in history, in these places, according to Hashem's plan for the world, as we see very clearly in the Torah, and in very much in depth and expanded form in sources like the Talmud and the Midrashim and the Kabbalah, the Zohar, and various other later sources. And we can focus now, just for today, on two particular places. One is Jerusalem, and the other is Gaza. Jerusalem, of course, is the pinnacle of spirituality in the world. That's the reason Hashem chose it to be the site of the temple. That's the reason He chose it to be the eternal capital of Israel, of the nation of Israel, of the Davidic kingdom, and for that matter, of the entire world. Not necessarily a capital, not in the political and economic sense per se, but certainly in the spiritual and the moral sense. Down the hill on the coast, Jerusalem, of course, being in the mountains. If we go down the hill to the west and out to the coast, we have the Gaza Strip, which, besides being actually a very beautiful piece of beachfront territory, carries a characteristic which is the opposite of Jerusalem. It's actually a place where humanity can reach its lowest level, and we see this in the actions and in the morality of the residents of the Gaza Strip through the ages, starting with the Philistines throughout much of the biblical period. These were people who had a very low moral standard. They were very violent. They were, of course, pagans, idol worshippers. They broke pretty much everything out of the 7 laws of Noah that are incumbent, as we all know, on all of humankind. And they were a thorn in the side of the nation of Israel for hundreds of years, because nobody managed to defeat them. And there were times even when the Philistines, who were considered the lowest of the low, as far as their morality and as far as their behavior as a society, they actually posed an existential threat to the Israelites at several points during biblical history, during the times of the Judges, for example. And it was only when King David defeated them soundly and completely that Gaza went down and Jerusalem went up. It's like a seesaw. One is up and one is down at any given moment. So we have the morality of the Philistines of the time, or today of Hamas, basically leading the world. We see that they are leading the world at the moment in various ways, and causing the West and causing the East to react to them and not to take any proactive action to remove their capabilities and their dominance, their moral dominance. Whereas Jerusalem at the moment is down. We don't have a temple. We don't have full-fledged Torah law in Israel. We have a lot of issues in Israeli society that need to be fixed. And we see that just as what happened just as happened in the time of King David, when he defeated the Philistines and pushed the influence of Gaza down, that enabled his son King Solomon, Melech Shlomo, to build the temple, and Jerusalem rose, and the name of Hashem and Hashem's law and Hashem's morality began to spread throughout the world. So it's kind of like a seesaw, and our hope and our prayer is that Hashem will enable us through this current situation to be able to put the morality of the actions of Gaza down and bring the morality and the actions of Jerusalem. That's about all I've got for today.
Okay, my friend. But really appreciate you taking the time and going through the in-depth. There's so many crazy stuff that's going on that I'm not sure that the people are going to hear about in the news. And that's kind of one thing that I do look forward to when we talk. So once again, I do appreciate your time. My friend, Zvi, thank you so much for your time. And we'll see you again another time, another place, hopefully with even better news. Take care.
Thank you, William. Thank you to the audience.
Absolutely.
And Hashem's blessings from Israel.
All right. See you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Hello, my dear friends. Hope this message finds you well. If you like the way this channel is going and the channel has been a blessing to you, please consider supporting the channel by going to the website, TaNachTalk.com, TaNachTalk.com. Thank you once again for your time and for supporting TaNaCh Talk. Shalom.
חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה